Welcome to Gluing Soles Part 1. This tutorial will show you how you can glue various different types of soles onto your trainers or sneakers. Maybe you are a customizer or a restorer, or maybe you are making your own trainers at home. This tutorial will go some ways to explaining how I work and the kind of equipment that I use at home. I'll try as much as possible to use things that you may have in your house, in your garage or workshop. I'll also try to help you with alternatives if you don't have the stuff that I'm using. In the following part, I'm going to talk to you about things that you may need to get in, some materials, maybe some tools, what they're called, what they do, and where you might buy them. Something you may not have lying around the house is a good shoemaking or shoe repairing glue. If you Google shoe repair glue, you get a whole host of products, and most of them aren't the kind of things that a professional would use. You're better off looking for shoe repair wholesalers, the kind of companies that provide your local cobbler or shoemaker with his or her materials. In the UK, there are companies like Aljo's, Charles Birch, Leather and Grindery. These companies do supply the industry, so you may need to register with them for an account, although some of the sites allow you to purchase directly without registering at all. If you're not looking to buy your glues a litre at a time, then you can purchase smaller amounts from companies like Sneakers ER, and the German company Renier sell small tubes that you can buy on Amazon. I mostly use Renier products. They're a company based in Cologne in Germany. I find that their website explains a lot about the glues, how to use them, how to identify materials. I'm particularly fond of their water-based glues, which are offering a much healthier solution for people who work with shoes. With so many different materials being used on shoes these days, you will find that you may need a specific glue to work with specific materials, but there are also some great all-round glues. Renier Col de Cologne is a glue that I use on nearly every surface, and on the Renier website I can find information about how to prepare those surfaces and troubleshoot any issues I might have. If you're repairing soles, or if you're creating soles, you may also need some sheet materials like midsole EVA or outsole rubber. Sites like Aljo's and Charles Birch also offer these types of materials, but you would need an understanding of what type of material you would need. The digital book, How Sneakers Are Made, is a great source of information about the type of materials that are used in their construction. I use a durometer, which is a device for measuring the density of rubber, foams and plastics. The scale I use is Shaw A, and most of the EVA sheeting I purchase is medium density and ranges from around 35 to 50. Higher density EVA sheeting is used for heel blocks and for other types of footwear, not really for athletic shoes. One of the benefits of using EVA sheeting when working at home is that it's easy to cut and you can sand it to shape it. You can also heat it up and mould it into different shapes. But to get a nice finish on your EVA sheeting, you would need to have a decent sanding machine. Professional shoemakers and shoe repairers or cobblers use scourers, sanders and grinders, trimmers and cutters, normally on what is known as a finishing machine. It's a large machine with a lathe with many different wheels on it and cutters and trimmers. Basically everything you would need in order to prepare and finish soling some shoes. These machines are really big, expensive, they have huge extractors that suck all the dust out. It's not the sort of thing that people are going to have at home. I'll show you what I use. A rotary tool like this one from Dremel is invaluable. You can choose from a multitude of attachments. The main one that I use is a very small drum sander, as you can see pictured here. It's great for getting inside and removing bits of glue from donor soles and tidying up various parts of the shoe upper, including the underside of the footbed. Next, I want to mention my bench sander. I actually got this before I figured out how I could adapt a bench grinder. Most of them have a circular disc and you can use this to round off edges and to shape sheets of EVA and outsole rubber. But for me, the really useful part is that pivoting long sanding belt. I can angle this vertically and sand away large portions of EVA midsole material with a shoe in my hand, and all of the dust I can collect in a bin underneath. It comes with holes to fix the main body to a workbench, but if you think a little bit sideways, you could mount it on a vertical surface and that way utilise the end a little bit like a drum sander. It's important to note that all these things are kind of doing the same job, and there's probably a multitude of different sanders out there and some creative minds out there that can come up with some better solutions. For me though, my most useful piece of kit is my bench grinder that I've adapted. It replicates that main sanding wheel that you would get on a finishing machine, enabling you to move a shoe underneath it at different angles and create shapes, curves and lines. My bench grinder came with stone wheels used for sharpening knives and tools. I removed the guards and then removed those wheels and attached some spindle adapters to the main shaft. This means I can simply screw on polishing mops, felt wheels and scouring wheels directly onto the shaft. You'll need to match up a sanding belt that matches the diameter of the mops or the felt wheels that you're using. And to help the sanding belt grip to the wheel, I coated the polishing mops in silicone sealant. This adaptation works really well. It's not as powerful as a finishing machine, but it gets the job done with a little bit of patience. The only problem is the dust, so unless you're going to build an extractor, I suggest that you wear a mask. In this clip I'm using a felt polishing wheel that I've coated in silicone with a matching sanding belt.
Lock it down, cause we doing it live. Plus we got more in deck than the Enterprise. And if I lay right there in between your thighs, you will see another episode of Deep Space Nine. Text message me on the video screen. Get that biz on the wireless. Never had to buy it, please. Satellite system, CRV. We can fold up, remove the two backseat.
You can also buy drum sanders that bolt directly onto the shaft of your grinder. These are available in woodworking tool shops. With these you use strips of sandpaper that are folded into the centre of the drum with a key. As you can see from a quick Google, there are lots of inventive ways of achieving the same thing. Okay, so now I want to take a look at some of the things that you can use to press the uppers and soles together and to fix foxing around the side of your midsoles. So contact cement often recommend sticking certain materials together with a lot of pressure and leaving the pressure on for a period of time, and some others you can press for a short period of time. Shoe repairers often used cobbler's lasts, which would fit inside of the shoe and you would hammer against. These are still very useful and you can use them in conjunction with other things. Some cobbler's lasts have detachable feet, which you can put inside the shoe and then press with another device. People like my good friend Sneaker Corpse on Instagram have used plywood insoles and a variety of clamps to get the kind of pressure they need. You can use the insoles of your trainers as a template to help you cut the plywood to the right shape. There are a multitude of clamps and tensioning straps out there to help you get that bond and pressure that you need. People have been known to fill bags of sand and put those inside the shoe uppers and then use tensioning straps to tighten the sole around the upper. For a long time I used a book press that I managed to get cheap on eBay, and you'll see me use this in one of the tutorials. I used a shoemaking last in this, but plywood and a wooden block or a cobbler's last would also have worked. And a yoga brick, which is both soft and very strong at the same time, works very well to get pressure on the forefoot. Manual sole pressing machines have been used by professionals for a very long time. A lot of them involve a pressurized bed that inflates and pushes the sole up towards the upper. Some also use a bed of high density foam or rubber, and the lasted upper is pressed down into this to get an evenly distributed pressure around the sole. I use this method with a bottle jack on a workshop press. I hope this gives you some ideas on what you can use, but also encourage you to be inventive about solving these problems. And just remember that a lot can be achieved with a simple hammer. Whatever method you want to use, I often find it very useful to use silicone sheets of paper to help me position the upper on the sole without any bonding taking place. Wooden shoe trees can also be very useful. Some of them are quite substantial and you can actually use them when pressing. They can be useful as something to hammer against when you are applying foxing or pressing the sidewalls of a cup sole unit onto the upper. If you need to change their toe shape slightly, they are easy enough to sand, or you can add and build layers onto them using something like a flexible car body filler. So a couple of good shoe trees and a hammer may be all you need for some simple jobs. So in this next part, I want to take a look at how you can make a sole. It could be for an upper that you've removed the existing soles from, or it could be for an upper that you've made by hand. All sneakers are designed and made around a last. The last itself will determine much of the shape, but the height of the heel and the toe of the sole unit can also affect how the shoe looks. A last is designed with a toe spring and the heel pitch or drop in mind. This can help with the purpose of the shoe. You can design a sole around how these two parts relate to each other. Imagine you wanted to take a football boot and convert it into a running shoe. The upper of the football boot is made around a last shape, and as we tilt the upper of the football boot down, reducing the toe spring, you can see that the heel is raised. We would have to consider what sort of midsole we would want in order for the shoe to still work properly. If we increase the heel too much, then it may be uncomfortable for the wearer, or just simply not look very good. The ball joint of your foot is shown here on the last. It's the widest part of the last. It's also the point at which the heel would be raised from. In old school running shoes, you often see a wedge of foam, often in a different colour, that runs from the heel to the ball joint. When making your own midsole from sheet materials, you may want to run a wedge that goes to the ball joint and follow this with a strip of foam that would run across the bottom of the whole of the unit, giving cushioning throughout. Your outsole would then be glued to this. If you so wished, you could run foxing around this and create a different type of look. In this video, I will show you how I create a midsole wedge, add an outsole, and then wrap some foxing around that to complete the shoe. In this project, I'm using a handmade shoe. It doesn't have any existing glue lines on it, so I can decide where I want the foxing to come to, how big the midsole will be, and the overall look of the shoe. That doesn't mean that you couldn't use the same techniques when repairing old shoes. For this project, I want to make the shoe as comfortable as possible, so I'm going to be using some cork to fill in the gaps between the upper and the footbed. You can use sheets of cork that you can glue on, or you can buy a neoprene that's mixed with cork granules and apply that with a spatula and wait for it to dry. Once it's dry, you can sand it down and create a nice flat surface with which to start building your midsole. So with my grinder, I've sanded down any of the pleats of the leather upper that was sticking out and created a smooth bottom surface of sanded leather and sanded cork with which to start working out my pattern for my EVA midsole. You might find that it's useful to scrunch up your paper before using it so that it bends around any bumps and curves in the bottom of your shoe. The edge of your shoe upper, where the side meets the bottom, is called the feather line. I'm going to want to get a nice, clean pencil line to show where this is on my paper. This would be very useful if you didn't have the original last the shoe was made on. Sometimes though, you can take a vintage shoe that you're working on and use the inner sole that comes with the shoe as a template for this, because it is often the exact shape of the bottom of the last. If you're working on a vintage shoe and you still have the original midsole, it's just that you want to replace it, then you could also use that as a template and draw around that. I'm just going to flip the paper over now and rub the pencil lines onto a piece of card so that I can get a nice firm template to use later. There are probably a dozen ways that you could recreate the shape of the bottom of the shoe that you're working on, and I encourage you to find out whatever works best for you. Now I want to take some measurements. I have an idea of how high I want the heel pitch to be, but I need to figure out how much of the foxing I need to cover that and the outsole, and how far up it's going to come on the upper. The foxing is going to be deeper at the back of the shoe. That's because that's where the heel pitch is higher and there will be an EVA wedge there running through to the ball joint. At the front of the shoe, I'm going to taper it down. It has less of the upper to cover, and there is only going to be the outsole material underneath this part. By lining the upper against a straight line, I can see the wide points of the last shape. Most importantly, I can see where the ball joint, the widest part of the foot, would be, and I know that on my paper template, that's where the EVA wedge should run up to. I'm just going to snip into the paper template here so that I can mark this on the EVA when I'm cutting it out later.
Seven, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
I now want to create a straight line from the ball joint to the back of the EVA wedge. I'll draw this on with a pencil, and I will keep an eye on it when I'm sanding down the EVA wedge so that I don't sand away too much. At this stage, I've only roughly cut out the EVA wedge, leaving plenty of room, leaving space to sand away the outline that I need. As there will be foxing going around the shoe, I'm going to glue the EVA wedge to the shoe before I start to sand it. You may want to make your EVA wedge separate from the shoe, not gluing it to the sole of the upper before sanding it. You may also want to do this if you want to make a running shoe sole where people will see the EVA wedge at the midsole itself. But as this shoe will have foxing on it, I'm not too concerned about any small mistakes, as these will be disguised by the foxing itself. Absorbent surfaces like suede and leather will take 2 coats of the Calder-Cologne, and the EVA itself only needs to be sanded as preparation. There's no primer needed, and that will only require 1 coat. This EVA that I'm using is a medium density EVA. It's measured at around a 40 Shore A rating, and you can buy a durometer that can measure the density of EVA. The glue will dry in about 15 minutes, then you can apply the second coat that's required on the absorbent surfaces like leather and suede. I'm helping the glue activate by using an infrared heat lamp here. You really don't need this if you pay attention to the instructions on the glue itself. It tells you that you have an open time where the glue is activated without the use of any infrared heat lamps or heat guns. I'll also be using my silicone paper as an aid to preventing the glued surfaces from touching until I'm ready and confident that they're lining up exactly where they need to be. I'm only going to hammer this in order to bond the two surfaces together. It should be more than sufficient. The midsole wedge itself is very light and will be bonded to the outsole, and all of those together will be bonded to the foxing. That said, if you don't have a last inside of your upper, you may need something solid to bang your hammer against. We will be sanding the outside edge of this EVA sheeting, but it's very useful to get as much of what is not needed off before we do that to speed the process up. You can use scissors or shears as well as a sharp knife to get a little bit closer to the upper, but just be careful you don't take too much off because you can't put it back on once it's removed. I like to use a combination of my customized bench grinder here to remove much of the EVA. I use a mask during this process. I can't work outside and I do not have an extractor for it, so it generates a lot of fine EVA dust, and that stuff is not great for your chest. So please work outside and wear a mask if at all possible, and if you can devise some sort of dust extraction method, then that would be even better. Again, you will need to mark that straight line to the ball joint so that you ensure you don't sand away too much EVA. If you have a worktop bench sander, something like this, you could use this to get those the bottom side of the EVA very smooth and level, ready for the next layer, whether it's an outsole or a run-through piece of EVA. If you have a smaller hand sander that uses belts, you can always mount this upside down in a vise and use this for the same purpose. Professional shoemaking finishing machines or cobblers finishing machines can do this sort of work in minutes, and you will find that the DIY methods will take a long time. You just need to bear with it. The tools you're using may not be as powerful, but they will get there in the end. You can test how level you've made your EVA wedge by standing the shoe on a flat surface and rocking it slightly forwards and backwards and side to side to see how stable it is.
If we could have come back together, it would have been very sweet, but
I've cut a Wellen or zigzag pattern rubber outsole from sheet material using my template, and I will sand and then prime this with the yellow Renier primer, ready for gluing.
I mean, is this a moral issue, or is this just because you think I have nice tits?
You'll want to work with this primer outside or wear a mask because it's a solvent, and you want to leave it for about 10 to 15 minutes for it to do its job.
It's over.
We will be repeating a lot of the processes that we've already used. We want to glue the components, allow them to dry, activate them, and press them. So again, I'm going to cut around the outsole material after pressing it with my hammer. I'm going to cut around it with a shoe knife or a paring knife. And if that's no good and you don't have one of those, then you could get closer with a pair of shears or strong scissors. Once you got quite close to the edge of the EVA, you could go around by hand with sandpaper and smooth everything out, or you could use a sanding machine or your Dremel rotary tool, whatever works best and whatever you've got to hand. You will find that the EVA rubber sands a lot more easily, so if you're not careful, you could end up sanding more of that away than the outsole rubber. Just keep an eye on what you're doing and make sure that you're not sanding away the EVA that you want to keep. There is always the danger that when you're using a drum sander or a rotary sander, that when you go close to the upper, you might clip the suede or the upper. It's not massively important if you're going to be covering it with foxing, as you will literally just be sanding just a few fibers off. If you want a nice clean outsole and midsole that will be seen, then you will have to be very, very careful not to clip the upper. You could try taping around the upper to stop any damage. You could also wrap bags around the shoe to keep it clean. So for this project, I've decided to wrap masking tape around my suede upper. I want to make sure I referred to my measurements, as I know that the foxing will be deeper at the rear of the shoe and shallower at the toe of the shoe, and I've transferred those measurements with the disappearing ink, and I have carefully taped with the quality masking tape all the way around the upper so that I can glue without worrying about making a mess. Just remember that you need to coat absorbent surfaces twice, allowing the first coat to dry. Some people may hammer or tap this down to create a better surface for bonding with the second layer of glue, creating a flatter surface. Remember to pay particular attention to overlaps of materials, like at the toe where a mudguard may meet the rest of the upper, or something like a stripe in the case of an Adidas shoe. After gluing the upper, you will want to prepare the rubber foxing, and you must do this by sanding it first and then applying the yellow primer to it. You're going to want this primer to dry for about 10 minutes before applying any glue, and remember to use a vapor mask or work in a well ventilated area. This will only need one coat of glue. There are two ways that we can glue the foxing to the upper. We can either allow the glue to dry, and then while it's still in its open time, normally about half an hour to 45 minutes, we can apply that glue with pressure to the upper of the shoe. Alternatively, we can allow the glue on the upper and on the foxing to exceed its open time. Once this has happened, you can reactivate it with heat. You can also use silicone paper to stop parts bonding until you're ready for them to be pressed together. In this video, you can see me applying foxing that I've glued that has exceeded its open time. It is no longer tacky and it will not bond to any glue unless that glue is activated. And I'll be using a heat gun to show you how you can do this a little bit at a time. Okay, right angle edge there to start with. Now you can heat up the foxing as well if you want to. We're going to heat the side wall as we go along anyway, so I'm just going to heat this area here. I'm going to go along. I'm going to leave maybe half a millimetre of the glue line so that I don't get any gaps. And as I go, I'm just going to heat up as I go along. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to slightly pull it, not too much, because if you pull too hard, you're going to distort the shoe upper. Something I haven't mentioned was the fact that you'll see that I've got a last in the shoe, and this is giving the shoe some shape, and it's also giving me something to push against and press against. If you don't have a last, you could put something inside of the shoe that is like maybe a piece of wood or something like that. While you're actually doing this part of the foxing application, it might be useful to put a filler bag full of rice or a filler bag of sand and stuff it into the shoe and give you that kind of this heavy solid filler to the shoe so that you've got something to push against. If you don't have that, you just have to make do. It is possible to do this without anything in the shoe. I'm still pulling, foxing as I go around. Obviously this also helps, a bit like a rubber band, as long as it's all joined at one end, at the end of it, it'll keep it on the shoe. There we go. So I'm going to go around the toe now. This is probably the most important part because this is the part you'll notice more if you get it wrong. I think the camera's misting up a bit from all this hot air. Don't worry if it doesn't glue all down properly now, because we're going to go round and heat everything at the end and whack it with a hammer as well. So I'm going to come around to this bit. You can see now though, I can tell how much I'm going to need. You see, I can line it up there and see how much I'm going to need. What I'm actually going to do there is I'm just going to cut it maybe 1 millimetre or 2 millimetres, no, 1 millimetre longer than it needs to be. And that's because I'm going to push the end in and then flatten all the excess that I've got, and that will help me bond those two edges. Okay. I'm just going to mark where that needs to go to. The other thing that I would normally do, and I won't do it now because obviously it will need to dry, is I would glue the ends of the two pieces of foxing that are going to meet. And what I'll do is I'll do that later, but normally I would do that and then I'd need to leave it for a good 10 minutes before I actually finish the job. We'll work without that for now. And as I come to the end, I'm pushing down towards that edge. They're butting up together, and you can see there, got a little bit of a bump there, but what will happen is I'll be able to push that down and disguise it. So for the remainder of this tutorial, we'll go back to working on the foxing that the glue has not exceeded its open time. So we'll be using this, it will be sticky and it will bond immediately the pressure is applied to it. As you move your way around the upper, it's useful to pull a little bit, giving a little bit of tension. You are essentially kind of wrapping your shoe in a rubber band, but you do need to be careful that as you pull it around the toe and the heel areas, you don't pull too much. Otherwise, when that last comes out, or if there is no last, you may end up bending the shoe up or down. It may not have the strength along the footbed to stay flat. So you need to pull a little bit, but not too much. So I'm making a mark and then I'm going to cut where I want to end the foxing. I normally leave it a couple of millimeters too long, and after gluing the edges and allowing them to dry, I can push the foxing and kind of butt up each edge or push each edge together. This may leave a small raised part to the foxing because of that extra 2mm, but you can easily flatten this with your finger and a little heat. I'll then go around applying heat and hammering. Again, if you don't have anything to put inside of your shoe, you could try using a wooden shoe tree or pieces of wood and even a bag of rice, as I mentioned earlier. You'll want to take some scissors or a knife and cut off any excess. Try and get as close as you can to the outsole itself. That will save you having to sand too much off. I'm going to use my drum sander, and I might even give it a polish with a polishing mop, which gives it a smoother finish right at the end. The polishing mop is made of felt, and although it's not a sandpaper, it can still take off rubber. You can use it on EVA as well as on the outsole rubber, and it works a lot more gently than a sandpaper drum. So for this project, I've cut my foxing from a sheet material to the size that I wanted. But you can buy foxing, and a lot of it is smoother and sometimes comes with lines to do a sidewall stitch. Often they look a lot more like the kind of foxing that you would find around a skate shoe or an old vintage Chuck Taylor, and you can get them in multiple colours and apply them in exactly the same way as I've shown you here.